Jung identified that 73% of his most high-risk patients exhibited one identical indicator before they became destructive. This psychological marker manifests in ordinary, even charismatic individuals who appear entirely benign on the surface. Upon recognizing it, Jung asserted that immediate disengagement is your sole safeguard. Today I will demonstrate precisely what to observe, because this signal does not declare itself through overt hostility or poisonous conduct. It is considerably more nuanced, and that is exactly what renders it so perilous. The indicator Jung pinpointed emerges when an individual commences projecting their shadow onto others with unwavering certainty. But here is what most individuals fail to comprehend about shadow projection. It is not merely psychological theory. It is an alert mechanism that can preserve your well-being. In 1913, Jung treated a case that would permanently alter his comprehension of human peril. This individual was charismatic, articulate, and seemed genuinely considerate of others. But Jung detected something that filled him with profound dread. Every person this individual described as malicious or manipulative shared the exact same characteristics, traits that Jung identified as the patient's own disowned attributes. The patient wasn't simply incorrect about people, he was methodically projecting his shadow onto everyone in his vicinity. Within half a year, this individual had ruined 3 significant relationships, caused 2 coworkers to be dismissed, and precipitated his own siblings' psychological collapse, all while preserving a stance of total innocence and believing himself to be the aggrieved party. Jung understood he was not confronting a simple misinterpretation. He was observing the most hazardous psychological mechanism in human interactions, unconscious shadow projection fused with absolute conviction. But that is not the most alarming aspect. The most alarming aspect is what contemporary neuroscience has uncovered about this procedure. When someone projects their shadow with conviction, their brain actively rewrites reality to corroborate their distorted perceptions. Dr. Robert Sapolsky's research at Stanford demonstrates that during intense projection episodes, the identical neural pathways activate as during delusional states. The person is not intentionally deceiving. Their brain has genuinely modified their perception of reality. This clarifies why shadow projectors are so persuasive to others. They authentically trust their distorted perceptions because their neural filtering mechanism has been commandeered by unconscious material. But here's where it becomes genuinely hazardous. The projector's conviction generates what psychologists term reality distortion fields. They do not merely perceive you inaccurately, they persuade others to perceive you through their distorted lens. Jung recorded instance after instance where shadow projectors demolished reputations, relationships, and entire social circles simply by disseminating their unconscious projections with utter certainty. Reflect on the most recent occasion someone accused you of motivations you never harbored, emotions you never experienced, or intentions you never possessed. If they did so with total assurance, impervious to any proof you presented, you were encountering shadow projection in real time. Here's what renders shadow projection so treacherous. The more potent the projection, the more convinced the projector becomes. It is a psychological feedback cycle that can ensnare whole families, professional environments, and communities. Ancient wisdom traditions comprehended this phenomenon long before Jung articulated it scientifically. Buddhism speaks of the clouded mirror that reflects one's own imperfections as external objects. Christianity cautions against observing the splinter in another's eye while overlooking the plank in one's own. But Jung probed deeper. He found that shadow projectors do not merely misapprehend reality. They fabricate alternate realities that feel utterly authentic to them and progressively authentic to others. The warning signal materializes when you detect a complete divergence between how someone characterizes you and your actual internal reality. They ascribe thoughts, sentiments, and motivations to you that are absent from your consciousness, and they do it with such certitude that you begin doubting your own sanity. This is psychological gaslighting at its most refined level. Not conscious manipulation, but unconscious reality distortion that can drive its targets to legitimate psychological collapse. But the projection itself is not the genuine hazard. The genuine hazard is how shadow projectors unconsciously enlist others into their distorted reality. Jung termed this collective possession. when entire groups begin perceiving the world through one individual's projections. Dr. Leon Festinger's research on cognitive dissonance elucidates how this occurs. When someone presents their projections with absolute conviction, others undergo psychological pressure to align their perceptions with the projector's certainty, rather than trust their own contradictory observations. This is how families turn against scapegoated members, how workplaces mob innocent employees, how communities destroy individuals based on projected allegations that have no foundation in reality. The projector becomes the epicenter of a psychological tempest, unconsciously marshalling others to assail the very qualities they cannot acknowledge in themselves. Jung observed this configuration in his most hazardous patients. They did not merely project their shadows, they constructed entire social systems organized around their projections. The person upon whom the projection falls becomes isolated, psychologically manipulated, and ultimately shattered by a collective delusion they never took part in creating. Jung specified 5 unmistakable warning signals that reveal hazardous shadow projection. Signal 1. Absolute certainty regarding others' motivations. They do not state, "I suspect you might be." They declare what you are with complete conviction about your internal conditions, motivations, and character. Signal 2. Immunity to contradictory evidence. No quantity of explanation, clarification, or countervailing proof can dongyao their perceptions. They interpret your attempts to rectify their misperceptions as additional confirmation of their accuracy. Signal 3. Emotional intensity disproportionate to evidence. They experience powerful emotional reactions to perceived offenses or behaviors that others find minor or non-existent. Their emotional intensity unveils the projected content, not your actual conduct. Signal 4. Consistent victim narratives. They consistently find themselves in conflicts where they are the innocent casualty of others' spite, manipulation, or brutality. The cast of characters changes, but they are invariably the wronged party. Signal 5. Recruitment behavior. They subtly or overtly attempt to persuade others to perceive you as they do, frequently through seemingly worried conversations about your character or behavior. When you observe these 5 signals together, you are not dealing with a simple misunderstanding or personality clash. You are confronting unconscious shadow projection that will intensify until it demolishes something: your reputation, your relationships, or your psychological stability. Shadow projection follows a predictable escalation pattern that Jung charted through decades of clinical observation. Phase 1. Initial projection. Subtle accusations or attributions that do not correspond with your reality. You dismiss them as misunderstandings. Phase 2. Conviction crystallization. The projections become more frequent and certain. The projector exhibits no doubt about their perceptions despite your corrections. Phase 3. Reality distortion. The projector begins interpreting everything you do through their projection filter. Neutral actions become proof of malicious intent. Phase 4. Social recruitment. They begin sharing their concerns about you with others, always from a position of apparent concern or anxiety. Phase 5. Collective possession. Others begin perceiving you through the projector's lens. You find yourself defending against accusations that seem to materialize from nowhere. Phase 6. Systematic exclusion. The group organizes around the shared projection, systematically ostracizing or attacking you for qualities that exist primarily in the projector's unconscious. Comprehending this pattern can save you years of psychological harm. The key is identifying Phase 2 and removing yourself before the projection acquires collective momentum. But shadow projection is not the sole hazardous sign Jung identified. He discovered an even more dangerous psychological condition: ego inflation. While shadow projectors are unconsciously hazardous, inflated individuals are consciously convinced of their own virtue while being utterly blind to their shadow. The inflated person does not merely project their shadow, they identify with archetypal energies that vastly surpass their personal capacity for integration. They become possessed by the savior, the sage, the truth-bearer, or the righteous judge. Unlike obvious narcissists who are easily identified, inflated individuals often appear spiritually advanced, morally superior, or intellectually enlightened. This apparent elevation renders them infinitely more dangerous, because people voluntarily submit to their authority. The warning signals of hazardous inflation include never questioning their own motivations. While authentic spiritual guides express humility before mystery, inflated individuals display absolute certainty about their perceptions and judgments. Interpreting disagreement as malevolence. They do not process questioning as useful information, but as opposition to truth, virtue, or divine will itself. Remarkable charisma combined with rigid cognition. Their conviction generates magnetic attraction, while their inflated condition eliminates psychological adaptability. Jung cautioned that inflated individuals eventually crumble under the psychic strain of equating their limited ego with transpersonal contents. But before they collapse, they frequently cause catastrophic damage to others through their absolute conviction in their own righteousness. The third hazardous sign Jung identified is complete identification with the social persona, the mask we present in public becoming the sole identity the person acknowledges. This creates what Jung termed the perfect person problem, someone so adjusted to social expectations that they have lost all connection to their authentic self and shadow. The hazard is not obvious because persona-identified individuals are often exemplars of social decorum. They always know what to articulate, how to behave, what expressions to display. But this perfection masks a frightening void. When someone has channeled all their psychic energy into upholding a flawless external image, their rejected shadow aspects do not vanish. They amass in the unconscious like psychological pressure in a sealed vessel. The warning signals include uncanny social perfection. They never appear to have difficult days, inappropriate reactions, or human inconsistencies. A synthetic quality to interactions. Despite technical correctness, something feels vacant or performed in their presence. Extreme reactions to perceived image threats. Any challenge to their perfect persona triggers disproportionate defensive responses. Jung documented how persona-identified individuals often undergo abrupt shadow eruptions, explosive episodes where all their suppressed content surfaces in destructive ways. The more flawless the persona, the more chaotic and hazardous the eventual shadow explosion. Perhaps the most disquieting sign Jung identified is archetypal possession. When someone relinquishes their individual identity and becomes a conduit for transpersonal energies beyond their capacity to integrate. You can recognize this condition when someone's personality seems to dissolve, supplanted by something ancient and impersonal. Their gaze alters, their voice changes. They speak with an authority that does not belong to their personal experience. They might become possessed by the eternal victim, perpetually suffering and demanding salvation, or the righteous warrior combating cosmic battles against evil that only they can perceive, or the divine parent treating adults like children requiring their guidance and control. The possessed individual experiences extraordinary certainty and purpose. The normal ambiguity of human consciousness vanishes, replaced by absolute conviction that can be immensely persuasive to others. But here is what renders archetypal possession so hazardous. Archetypes contain extreme polarities. The identical archetypal energy that generates saints also generates fanatics. The person possessed by the savior archetype will inevitably manifest its shadow aspects, often becoming the very entity they profess to oppose. Jung recorded cases where possessed individuals committed acts entirely contrary to their conscious values, later experiencing memory loss or elaborate rationalizations to explain their contradictory behavior. The final hazardous sign is what Jung termed the compulsion to repeat, unconscious patterns where someone obsessively recreates the same distressing situations while believing themselves to be victims of cruel destiny. This might appear less hazardous than the other signs, but individuals trapped in repetition compulsions unconsciously recruit others to perform roles in their unresolved psychological dramas. The warning appears when you notice someone consistently concluding in identical painful situations with different people, always adhering to remarkably similar scripts. They seem genuinely astonished each time the pattern recurs, as if they are victims of fate rather than unconscious architects of their own recurring experience. The hazard is being enlisted into their psychological drama. Without realizing it, you can find yourself performing a role in a story that commenced long before you encountered this person. Usually the role of betrayer, abandoner, or persecutor. Jung termed this negative synchronicity, the unconscious capacity to orchestrate encounters that perpetuate unresolved patterns. The person trapped in repetition compulsions unconsciously emits signals that attract precisely those who can assist them in recreating their original traumatic scenarios. Now that you can identify these hazardous signals, how do you safeguard yourself? Jung's protection protocol is deceptively straightforward. Conscious awareness combined with immediate boundary enforcement. Step 1. Trust your instinct. If someone's perception of you consistently conflicts with your internal reality, trust your internal reality over their projections. Step 2. Do not attempt to persuade them. Shadow projectors, inflated individuals, and possessed people are immune to contradictory evidence. Endeavoring to convince them frequently fortifies their projections. Step 3. Restrict information. Do not share personal particulars that can be twisted into proof supporting their projections. Step 4. Document interactions. Maintain records of conversations and events. Projectors often rewrite history to support their distorted narratives. Step 5. Seek external perspective. Converse with trusted others who know both you and the projector. Verify your perceptions with individuals outside the projection field. Step 6. Withdraw when essential. Sometimes the only winning strategy is not to participate. If someone exhibits multiple hazardous signs, strategic withdrawal may be your sole protection. Recall that patient who altered Jung's understanding of human danger, the one who demolished relationships while maintaining complete innocence. Jung ultimately realized that this patient's shadow projections were not random. They were systematic endeavors to avoid confronting his own capacity for the very behaviors he observed in others. The patient could not endure knowing that he was capable of manipulation, cruelty, and selfishness. So his unconscious mind projected these qualities onto everyone around him, permitting him to feel pure while unconsciously enacting the very behaviors he condemned. This is the tragic paradox of shadow projection. Individuals become the very entity they most dread or despise, all while preserving complete unconsciousness of their own transformation. But here is what Jung discovered that can save you. Conscious awareness of these patterns shatters their power. When you can identify shadow projection, ego inflation, persona identification, archetypal possession, and repetition compulsions, you are no longer susceptible to their unconscious influence. The most hazardous people are those who are unconscious of their own darkness. But the instant you become conscious of these patterns in others and in yourself, you step out of their psychological jurisdiction. Jung dedicated his life to mapping these hazardous territories of the human psyche, not to generate fear, but to generate liberation. Liberation from unconscious manipulation. Liberation from projection fields. Liberation from being recruited into other people's psychological dramas. The most dangerous Carl Jung psychological sign is not merely shadow projection. It is the absolute unconsciousness of one's own shadow, combined with complete conviction in one's own perceptions. When you encounter someone who exhibits this sign, remember Jung's words. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. People who cannot accept themselves completely will inevitably make you the repository for everything they cannot endure seeing in themselves. Your protection lies not in combating their projections, but in maintaining conscious awareness of what belongs to you and what belongs to them. That consciousness is your shield against the most hazardous psychological forces in human relationships. Have you encountered these warning signs in your relationships? Share your experience in the comments. Sometimes recognizing these patterns in our past can protect us in our future. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights into Jung's psychology that can transform how you navigate human relationships. If you're ready to explore more strategic insights about power dynamics and motivation, check out my video on the psychological principle that modern neuroscience has now proven devastatingly effective. The moment you defend yourself, you've already lost the power game. Thank you for watching.